Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3, 3, 3. Welcome back, y'all. We're back from the brink and back in the saddle on the Backlook Cinema Podcast. I'm your host, Zo. That's Z-O or Z-O if you're outside of the U.S. Taking a look back at the movies of yesteryear. It's the 70th episode. Thanks for downloading and streaming us. We really appreciate it. The reason we started this show was to strengthen the bond between my son, Zach, and me, Zo. We watch movies that I loved when I was growing up in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and I'm going to tell you what Zach thought about those classic movies that we just watched yesterday. If you like this show, then rate and review us, review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and SpotChaser.com, or your favorite podcast app. Finally, please follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. You can find the details in the show notes. And as I mentioned last episode, our episodes will now start to come out on Mondays because I realized that trying to put it out on Sunday was foolhardy. It was extremely difficult. So we're switching to Mondays now. The movie we watched yesterday was Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home. So what's this movie about? Well, let's see. Admiral Kirk and his loyal bridge officers have resurrected their beloved friend, Captain Spock. In the process, they've stolen a Federation starship, destroyed Federation property, disobeyed orders, and caused an intergalactic incident. Now they must return to Earth and Federation HQ to face the consequences. As they approach Earth, they see it is besieged by a massive and powerful alien probe. What extraordinary measures must Kirk and his crew do to save Earth? So this movie was released in November 26, 1986. It was produced by Paramount Pictures and Industrial Light and Magic. It grossed over $109 million on a $25 million budget. It had great reviews. It was the biggest grossing film of that time, or the biggest grossing Star Trek film of that time. Is the fourth film in the series. Previously, I think the highest grossing was it was probably Star Trek, the motion picture, or it may have been Star Trek to the Wrath of Khan. So each of those pictures made about between $40 and $50 million. The first picture, it had somewhere around a $50 million budget, or maybe it grossed $70 million. I don't have the notes in front of me, but I know it was around that much. I think it cost like $40 million and it grossed $70 million. And the second film, the budget was cut down to $15 million or $14 million, and it grossed around $50 million or something like that. So those did very well. Well, at least the second one did very well. And the third one did not do so well. But this film, the fourth in this series, it was the highest grossing so far of that series. And it had a bump in budget, as I've read, and $109 million. So that pretty good take. 4 times its budget. That's pretty good take. And it also had great reviews. So this movie was starring William Shatner as Admiral James T. Kirk, Leonard Nimoy as Captain Shajan Tagai Spock, DeForest Kelley as Commander Leonard Bones McCoy, son of David, M.D., James Doohan as Captain Montgomery Scott, Walter Koenig as Commander Pavel Chekhov, George Takei as Commander Hikaru Sulu, Nichelle Nichols as Commander Nyota Uhura, Catherine Hicks as Dr. Gillian Taylor. You may have seen Miss Hicks in Child's Play from 1988, or Peggy Sue Got Married, and she's been on lots of TV's movies. So if you watch a lot of Lifetime or similar channels, you've definitely seen her. Also, we have Mark Leonard reprising his role as Ambassador Sarek. And after that is Brock Peters. He played Admiral Cartwright. You've probably seen him in Soylent Green or To Kill a Mockingbird. And finally, I have Robert Ellenstein. He played the Federation Council President. He's been in North by Northwest, and Brewster's Millions. This is the second movie directed by Leonard Nimoy, as far as I can tell. And then after this, he did 3 Men and a Baby, which was very well received. This movie was written by Gene Roddenberry as the creator. Leonard Nimoy contributed to the story. I guess he did the main story. And he also wrote Star Trek: The Undiscovered Country. And also Harve Bennett, he's also the producer, and he had been a story contributor since Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. Music was provided by Leonard Rosenman. He's also done Barry Lyndon. I want to say Lyndon. He also did the music for the movie Barry Lyndon, La La Land, and RoboCop 2. And the music in this movie was much more lighter than the previous films, and probably the lightest composition in the whole series. It actually sounded like Christmas music, and I guess it's apropos since it came out in November. But yeah, it was very light. It was setting you up to know that this is not going to have the serious gravitas of this previous movie. It was setting you up. They wanted you to relax. They wanted you to have a good time. This is going to be a fun Star Trek movie, and they set the tone in the opening credits with the score by Leonard Rosenman. So that's it for the opening credits, and I have a couple of announcements. Let's see, what do I have for announcements? I'm looking. Probably just the same old stuff that I said before. T-shirts, hoodies, mugs, face masks at backlookcinema.com/shops. And you can check weekly for new designs. And I know what you're thinking. I've been checking for weeks. I hadn't seen any new designs yet. No worries. They're coming. I promise. And there are links to teespring.com and tpublic.com. They're still there. Hadn't taken them down yet. And also the pint glasses. The pint glasses are my favorite, and they're only available at teespring.com. All right, now we're at our favorite parts. I can't believe we're here already. We kind of like sped through the first part of the pod. So I'm going to go through my parts, and then I'm going to at the same time tell you what Zach liked, but it's all basically the same thing. So one of the things I noticed when the movie opens, and this is the first time I noticed, this is not the first time I've seen this movie or all the Star Trek movies, but this is the first time I noticed that the basic premise of this story is almost identical to the premise of the story of Star Trek: The Motion Picture, which I hadn't covered and probably won't cover because it's a little bit long and boring, and it takes itself way too seriously. And it takes a lot of cues from movies like 2001: A Space Odyssey. But in that movie, a large, giant, overpowering alien spaceship / probe or whatever is on its way to Earth, on its way to Earth. It's causing a huge path of destruction. And then when it finally gets to Earth, it's asking for something or someone. In particular, it's asking for its creator. It knows that its creator is on Earth and is asking for its creator. So similarly, in this movie, a large, powerful, undeniable, gigantic space probe thing is going through the galaxy. Is not really causing destruction, but it's disabling ships on its way to its destination. So the first ship happens to be the U.S.S. Saratoga, and that ship is, as the entity approaches the U.S.S. Saratoga, the Saratoga is disabled. It loses its lights, its engines, its weapons. The power is just drained from the ship, and they find themselves just floating in space. And all the spacecraft that are in the path of this entity just lose power in various types of ways. There's one ship that happens to lose life support, and they're just fighting to survive. and then it gets to Earth, and then it starts bombarding the Earth with this message. The message itself is causing a massive amount of disruption and power failure, and it's sending this signal to the ocean, and it's this weird screeching type noise that it's sending to the ocean, and they can't figure out what it wants, what it's looking for, and why it's so destructive. And that is how it's similar in a lot of ways to the very first movie. But because the overall story is so good, I think that we can forgive it. As I said, is the first time that I noticed the similarities, but now that I noticed it, the story in this movie is so good, and it was so well received when it came out, that I think it can be forgiven for kind of copying a lot of the story elements from the first movie. So one of the things that I loved and that really stayed with me through the years, I remember it's one of the things that stayed with me from when I first saw it, was the time travel sequence. So this is Kirk and crew. They realize that they have to find some humpback whales to communicate with this probe. The probe is looking for humpback whales, but humpback whales on Earth are extinct in the 23rd century. So the crew decides that the only way they're going to get this probe off their back, because there are no other blue humpback whales in the galaxy, and that the whales were indigenous to Earth, the only thing they can do to save the Earth is to go back in time, and to a time when humpback whales were alive, and pick up some and bring them back to the future or back to Starfleet, where they can just dump them in Earth's ocean and hopefully communicate with the probe and satisfy the probe. You know, maybe the probe will talk to the whales and everything will be all right. And they really decide that there's no other option. And time travel in the 23rd century is actually quite routine. In the TV episodes, there's an episode where they go back in time just to do some historical research, just to watch people in the 1960s, seeing how they was living. And their plan was to just stay in orbit and not be noticed, but they get noticed, and then they have this whole kerfuffle with a time travel incident. And then there was another time where they used this alien object to go back in time. But yeah, there's a lot of time travel in Star Trek, so it's not all that unusual. So it's like, for them to go back in time to try to save the Earth ain't nothing but a thing. And then we're just gonna slingshot around the sun, go to all points in time, and end up where we're supposed to when whales were around. It's just routine. So that was fun. I love the overall lighthearted tone of this movie, and I think that's something that Zachary liked too. Their arrival there's a park in San Francisco where they decide to go and try to start their search for whales. I think they found the whale life signs in San Francisco, so they wanted to go to San Francisco to find out why there were whales inside the city as opposed to in the ocean. And they go to San Francisco and they land in a park at like pre-dawn. And the scene cuts to a couple of garbage men. They're just doing their job, and they're, throwing garbage in the back of their truck. All of a sudden it's all windy, and the wind is torrential, and they can't figure out where this sudden burst of wind is coming from. And a cloaked bird of prey lands, and they look towards where all this noise is at, where the wind is coming from, and they see this light coming out of nowhere, and they see like a figure looking like he's stepping out in this light that seems to be like just floating in the air. They decide that they didn't see it, and they were just going to drive out of there. It's like, did you see that? And it's like, no, I didn't see it, and you didn't see it either. Let's get out of here. So that was fun. So there's so that, I think that kind of starts the lighthearted, overall tone of the movie. I really like as they continue their adventure, they're out of the bird of prey, and they're like in downtown San Francisco, just trying to figure out how to navigate a bustling city in the middle of the daytime. And they're just kind of, and they look really out of place because they're like tourists. They're like tourists that kind of got dropped in the middle of San Francisco, and nobody is paying them any mind. As I've come to understand, they're actually, the actors are actually in the middle of San Francisco, and people are walking around, and so the reactions of people is real because they're just walking around them, and they're just regular people, just tourists. So they're walking around trying to find their way. They realize that they need money because we still use money in the 1980s. To resolve this, Admiral Kirk goes to a pawn shop to sell his antique glasses. These antique glasses were given to him as a gift for his birthday by Dr. McCoy way back in, I believe, Star Trek II. So Admiral Kirk is allergic to whatever medicine is used to correct people's vision in the 23rd century. So he actually needs regular glasses. So he has these antique glasses. He decides to sell them at a pawn shop. And these glasses are actually worth $100 in 1986. So they're probably more than priceless in the 23rd century. So $100 it doesn't sound a lot today, but in today's dollars, when adjusted for inflation, it's roughly around $251.91. That's about, seeing that there are about 7 of them like roaming around or needing to roam around Los Angeles. That's about that's a $36 split 7 ways. So you have all of his crew members walk around with roughly $36 in today's money. I guess it's enough to last for a few hours if you stay away from the restaurants and the eateries. It's enough to catch a cab or a bus if you needed to get somewhere. And really, they could beam aboard back to their starship if they ever needed to get something to eat, because the food replicators work, the transporter work, so they're fine. With $35, I believe they're fine. They're good. They'll be all right. So another thing that I really liked about this movie is that everyone had something to do. And a lot of shows and movies, it's really only the 3 principal characters as Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, and they go off on whatever adventures that they're supposed to be on. And everybody else is just kind of stuck on the ship. Maybe they're doing some repairs, or maybe they're working on communications like Uhura. Like in almost every TV show or in almost every movie, she's really just stuck in that chair. Just, oops, stuff fell. Sorry. So in every TV show and every episode or most episodes and in almost every movie, she's basically just stuck in that chair, just fiddling around with controls, saying like, yes, Admiral, or hailing frequencies open, Admiral, or there's a distress call, or something like that. Just communication stuff. She really did anything outside of that. And the same almost with Chekhov, like basically just sitting at his console. The people that did the most were probably Scotty. He's always trying to fix something in engineering. And maybe Sulu. There were some scenes where he was doing something other than just sitting at that console, but mainly that's what Uhura and Chekhov were doing, was sitting at consoles. So, and so what I really liked about this movie is, like I said earlier, is that everyone had something to do. So Scotty and McCoy had to go and figure out how they can get transparent aluminum. Scotty prefers to transport the whales in a container that is made of transparent aluminum, Only problem is transparent aluminum doesn't exist in 1986. So they have to figure out how to get some anyway. Uhura and Chekhov are looking for a nuclear vessel. and that's a funny scene of them looking for a nuclear vessel. So really their mission is to go to a nuclear vessel to collect the type of photons that are emitted by the radiation of a nuclear reactor. They plan to collect that radiation and use that radiation to recrystallize the dilithium crystals, which were damaged because of the time travel. And of course, Admiral Kirk and Mr. Spock, or Captain Spock, their mission is, or their task is to find a way to collect the whales. And their lead is this the doctor that works at this cetaceous museum, or this whale museum, and convince her to try to get the whales that are contained in that museum. And the museum is going to release the whales anyway. So they was going to release the whales in the open ocean, but the crew of the Klingon vessel are trying to, Kirk and his crew, they're trying to get the whales first before they're released in the open ocean. And I think that's the whole. Am I missing anybody? I think there's one. I'm missing Sulu. Sulu is, I think he's on a lone mission, or he's with somebody. Who is he with? I think I account for everybody but Sulu. Well, Sulu, he's on a mission to grab a helicopter. And they don't really show much of his mission. There was a scene where he was supposed to have this whole thing of how he stole a helicopter, but they had cut it out because I'll explain it in the trivia. I wrote it down, but there's a whole thing. It's why they had to cut the scene of Sulu stealing the helicopter. But everybody, as I said, everybody had their task. Everybody was like doing stuff, and that's what I really liked about this particular movie. And it kind of carried on into, I guess it carried on to Star Trek V, but that movie was so bad that I hadn't watched much of it. And there's some more of it in Star Trek VI, where it seemed like everybody had stuff to do in Star Trek VI. Sulu actually got his own ship, the ship that he was lusting after, the Excelsior. And because it was like a kind of a mystery, everybody was looking for clues. So the tradition of giving everybody to do carried on in the next couple of movies. I'm trying to think. It also influenced Star Trek: The Next Generation, I believe, and all the Star Trek series following, which all had much better developed characters than the previous, like the original series. So, continuing along on some of my favorite parts, the way Kirk charmed the cetacean. We'll call him cetaceous. They mean whale, okay? I'm sorry. The whale doctor. The way he charmed the whale doctor in his Captain Kirk fashion, that was charming. And as he was charming, they go visit the museum. He charms the whale doctor by being somewhat knowledgeable about whales and being very sympathetic, especially since they need whales to save the future. And while he goes on, both he and Captain Spock go on the tour of this museum. It's a guided tour led by the doctor. Hold on. Let me look up her name real quick. I have it right here, right in front of me. Catherine Hicks. She plays Dr. Gillian Taylor. So they follow Dr. Taylor along with the tour group. And everybody's, sitting around watching, and they finally get to the whale, the part of the museum where you can see the whales underwater, and everybody's all charmed and happy and whatnot. And next thing you know, they see a man floating in the whale tank going to the whales. And that was so awesome, especially how William Shatner absolutely sold Kirk's reaction to Spock swimming in the tank with the whales. and everybody is just aghast. And some people probably think that it's part of the show, like the guy was just like a worker, but it wasn't just a guy. It wasn't somebody who worked there. It was Mr. Spock, who had disappeared from the crowd and went into the tank and started mind melding with the whale. I had read somewhere that the guy said, I don't know how you could psychically get information from a whale, but like it's funny how people who are not familiar with Star Trek and the lore and everything kind of misinterpret what's happening. Actually, for one thing, why can't you psychically link to a whale? I mean, he's an alien, so why can't the alien have a psychic link with the whale? And then having the psychic link, why can't the psychic link get information from a whale? I don't. And you gotta. How do you know how psychic powers work? How are you going to be flippant about an alien being able to get psychic information from a whale? And the other thing is that in this, even now, what we suspect, but in this version of the universe, whales are highly intelligent, basically intelligent, sentient species. We're not being human and not being understand or fully understand whales. Like, we don't know. We just think that they're animals that we can hunt. But in Star Trek reality, they're highly sentient species that are every bit as sentient as and intelligent as human beings. So, the mind meld scene and Kirk's reaction to it was absolutely amazing. Going back to an earlier scene, it's the famous curse words uttered by Admiral Kirk. Was the double dumbass. That was awesome. So when they first get there and they're wandering around the city, and some guy almost hits them because they're crossing the street against the light because they don't know the rules. They don't know how to act in 1986 society and how you're supposed to cross the street and whatnot, and cars everywhere. And somebody, a guy slams on the brake and it says, "Get out of the road, dumbass." And Kirk goes, "Well, double dumbass on you," because he doesn't know how to curse. Obviously, in later Trek series, they somehow fixed the cursing problem, but in the current in 1986, they don't. For some reason, they don't know how to curse, and that it's actually funny. They didn't curse that much, obviously, in the original series. Fun fact: the first curse words that was ever uttered on television happened on a Star Trek series, and it was on first time, I guess, a harder curse word, because I think they said "damn" all the time, but they didn't say anything harder than "damn." And I don't know, maybe it's not considered a really hard curse word, but tale be told, the first curse words were when Kirk had finished an adventure and he said, "Let's get the hell out of here." And those are supposed to be the first curse words uttered on television. So it's not like he didn't know how to curse. He'd been doing it for a while. But I guess it's uncommon in the 23rd century. So Spock had asked him about this. He said, "Well, since we got here, your language has been, had curious colloquialisms." And Kirk had to say, "Well, you had to use profanity in 1980s because if you don't use it, then, people just don't pay attention to you. You can't, almost like people don't even listen to if you say every other curse word. Every other word is a curse word." And Spock was like, "Well, perhaps I should try it." And Kirk was like, "I don't know. I don't think you should try it. I don't think you're going to get used to it or you get the hang of it." And that's when Spock replies, "The hell I can." And that begins Spock's journey into cursing whenever he got the chance. I guess he was charmed by profanity and wanted to experiment with it. So that was fun. So something that both me and Zach liked and we talked about was Scotty's mission. On Scotty's mission, they had to go and find a manufacturer. So they went to a plastics manufacturer and they pretended that they were important folks that were inspecting a plant. They pretended that they had an appointment and that they were all indignant because people were, that forgot that they were supposed to be there when they didn't have an appointment at all. And so Scotty pretended to be this professor, and Bones McCoy pretended to be the assistant to the professor. And so Scotty had found the head of the engineers, I guess, or the guy that ran the plant. And after the pretense of inspecting the plant, Scotty had proposed an offer. It's like, what if I can give you this great formula for he said that, how thick would this plastic, I forgot the exact type of plastic, but whatever the acrylic plastic or whatever strong plastic would be, how thick would it need to be to contain this much water? And the guy said, well, it would need to be 6 inches. Well, and then Scotty said, well, what if I can give you a material that can hold that same amount with being only 1 inch thick? And the guy was intrigued. So that's when Scotty had, he was going to propose something, but he needed to go to the guy's computer to show him the formula. Problem being, I'll explain the problem. Here's what happened. So they go to the computer and they sit down, and Scotty does what he always does when he interacts with the computer. He says, "Computer," to prompt the computer to respond. We're almost doing it now. We can, except we don't say computer. We say, we talk to Amazon or no. Well, we talk to Alexa. We talk to Google. We talk to Siri. We talk to different. We used to talk to Cortana to get to prompt a response. But in his time, the prompt was computer, and he was going computer. And obviously, there's no response in 1986. And then McCoy spots a mouse and gives it to Scott, thinking that it was some kind of microphone for the computer. And so he says into the mouse, "Computer," and still nothing. No worries, folks. He didn't blind himself by staring into the bottom of the mouse, because in the 1980s, they didn't have laser mice. They had a track wheel back in the day. So finally, the guy points to the keyboard. And Scott says, a keyboard, how quaint. And so he starts typing in the formula. From my memory, he used all of his fingers to type on it like a regular keyboard, but he didn't do that. He just used 2 fingers. And the reason for that, somebody who didn't know how to type would type on a keyboard. So when I saw that he only used his 2 fingers, I thought, well, that's way more realistic. I mean, he typed really fast, but still he only used his 2 fingers, like somebody who didn't know how to type. And I thought that was realistic. Another reason that he only used his 2 fingers to type is because what most people don't know is that the actor James Doohan is missing one of his fingers. He was actually in World War II, and one of his fingers got shot off. One of his middle fingers got shot off on D-Day. So when he started typing, he had balled up his fist to hide the fact that he was missing a finger. And on most episodes of Star Trek, you can't see it. Most of the movies, you can't see it. But every once in a while, you can see that he's holding his hand in such a way that you can clearly see that he's missing a finger. So he punches up the formula for transparent aluminum. And then after he offers the guy the formula, McCoy took him to the side and said, "Are you sure that we're not creating any time paradox by giving him the formula to transparent aluminum?" And this is where Scotty says, "How do we know this guy didn't invent this stuff?" So they weren't all that concerned. It's like it had to have been invented sometime. They figured they're not going to break anything by giving him the formula early. So that was one of both of our favorite parts. Another one was, I mentioned earlier, Chekhov and Uhura asking random people about how to find the nuclear vessel. That's a lot of people's favorite part, especially Walter Koenig's very exaggerated, I feel, his exaggerated Russian accent. So they're asking, where's the nuclear vessel in Alameda? The nuclear vessel, and people are just kind of walking by. So that was a real funny. They looked so out of place. It was so charming. part of that lighthearted flair of this show, of this movie. And I figured if they're looking for a nuclear vessel, you figure they could have just scanned it with their vessel, the Klingon vessel. They found the life signs of the whales with their vessel. They could have found any sources of nuclear power while they were still landing to Earth, but they didn't. There's no explanation for this. They could have said the sensors were down or something, or it was confusing or what. No, we're not getting any explanation for why. So they're sent out to find it. Obviously they eventually do. So, there another part in the movie that it's a real crowd pleaser for everybody, including me and Zach, was when they finally managed to get on the city bus. I'm talking about Kirk and Spock and Kirk. When they finally managed to get on the bus, they get to and I say finally because when they first attempted, all they had were dollar bills. They didn't know what exact change was, and the bus driver couldn't break $1 and basically put them off the bus until they can get exact change. So when Spock and Kirk are on the bus, when they finally able to figure everything out, there's a rude guy in the back of the bus. He's a punk rock dude, he has a mohawk, and he has dyed his hair red and yellow, whatever. And he's just jamming to his rock music, but it's on a boombox, and it's loud where everybody can hear it. Not everybody wants to hear a boombox when they're trying to get up, go about their day. And when I think it was Kirk that asked the dude to turn the radio down because he was annoyed. He noticed everybody else was annoyed. And the dude, just gave him the middle finger and then turned it up even louder. So now everybody's super annoyed. So, Spock reached over and gave him the Vulcan neck pinch, knocked the dude right out, and everybody's clapping and cheering because he shut that dude up. So that was fun. Then there was Chekhov's interrogation. So this is when their plan, his and Uhura's plan, was to beam aboard the Russian vessel. I mean, the nuclear vessel at night. The vessel happened also to be the Enterprise, the United States version of the Enterprise. It's an aircraft carrier. So he beams aboard the aircraft carrier, and they go skulking around. They find the place where they can, I guess, the nuclear reactors, where they can gather the special photons to complete their mission. And they get the protons, but since they're on the vessel and the device they use to collect the photons is showing a type of power drain in the command center of the ship, so obviously Marines are sent to look for them and to basically detain them. So knowing that they're low on time and knowing that they're being chased, Chekhov gives the device that collected photons to Uhura so that she can beam away, and then he was going to beam away second, but his signal for whatever reason starts to fade and Scotty can't beam him up, so he gets captured and he started to be interrogated. And I can't remember the whole interrogation sequence, but it's so awesome because Chekhov has no idea what this dude is trying to say to him. He's super naive about what the guy is saying. And he tells the absolute truth. Like, the dude is asking him, like, who are you? What's your name? And Chekhov gives he's like, I'm from the United Federation of Planets. This is my ID number. My name is Pavel Chekhov. And the guy is like, man, I know this guy is Russian, but, he don't seem like he's all there. And so when the guys weren't paying attention, when his interrogators weren't paying attention, Chekhov grabs it's either a phaser or a disruptor. Since it's a Klingon weapon, I'm going to say it's a disruptor. And he says, I warn you, let me go or stand back, or I will have to stun you. And then the guys start to approach him, and he says, well, I warned you. And he tries to stun them, but the disruptor doesn't work. And he suspects it's because of the radiation. So he throws it at the guys, and he runs off. And in trivia, I'll kind of explain this in the more details, but it's kind of weird that he leaves the most amount of technology from the 23rd century right there on that naval vessel, and it doesn't seem like anybody ever did anything about it. But the interrogation itself was fun. So on his way to try to escape, he falls off a rail. He hits a lower deck of the ship, and he's knocked out cold. He had to be rushed to a hospital. The rest of the crew finds out that he's in the hospital. So Box, I think it was Leonard Nimoy, I believe, stays on, or Mr. Spock stays on the vessel, on the Russian vessel. So Kirk, the doctor, what's her name? I'm still thinking about it. Dr. Taylor, Kirk, Dr. Taylor, and Bones, they go to try to rescue Pavel Chekhov. So they go to the hospital where he's at, and on the way, they had to split up to kind of look for him. And then on the way, Dr. McCoy sees this woman. He's like, she's in pain. And he's like, what's wrong, darling? And she says, I'm on dialysis. I'm in so much pain. And he goes into his doctor's purse. He takes out some pills and he said, here, take this. And you'll feel all better later. Just call me in the morning. And then he leaves her. In the meantime, they find, and this leads to something later. This is why it's really funny. So they find where Chekhov is, and they go and they have this whole adventure around because they're all dressed up as doctors. Dr. McCoy has an argument with this ancient doctor, and it's like all the while he's in this hospital, he's like, I'm in the Stone Age, I'm in a Bronze Age. This is ancient medicine. And so he's fighting with the doctor that's about to operate on Chekhov, and they was going to relieve pressure in the frontal lobe. They was going to actually drill a hole in his head, and Dr. McCoy was like, my God, man, you can't cure him by drilling holes in his head. And then they start having this highly technical argument. And that's when Kirk just got the whole doctor staff and locked him in a closet. Well, he put him in a closet and shot it with the disruptor. And then Bones was able to revive McCoy, and they, get him out on the stretcher. They all still dressed as doctors. They're being chased. When security is notified that they're kidnapping or they're stealing or they're helping Pavel escape, so now security is after him, and as they run by the woman to whom Dr. McCoy gave the pill, she's like all happy and screaming. She's like, the doctor gave me a pill and I got a new kidney. The doctor gave me a pill and I got a new kidney. That was pretty awesome. So, Dr. McCoy could not help but be passionate, even though it's not his time, even though these people are, they're long dead in his time. But while he's going around trying to rescue his crewmate, he heals a woman in passing. So, another thing that I wanted to mention is that when they're trying to revive Pavel, they're like, come on, Pavel, wake up. Come on, Pavel, wake up. And this is significant because I don't think anybody else has said his first name, especially in the original series. I don't think they ever said his first name in the movies. I think maybe in Star Trek 2, maybe it was mentioned. But to me, I feel like Star Trek 4 is the first time that Admiral Kirk had ever said Chekhov's first name. So I feel like that's significant. And like Uhura didn't even get a first name. Neither Uhura nor Sulu. Sulu got her first name in Star Trek 6. But Uhura didn't get a first name until like the new Star Trek movie. Like they really neglected Uhura for a long time. So like I said, we both love how Dr. McCoy was indignant to 1980s medicine, and then basically everything kind of flows like as it was supposed to. Like a movie like this, where it's basically kind of a heist movie because everybody is trying to steal stuff. Like I said, Chekhov and Uhura's trying to steal the anti-protons. Kirk and Spock are basically trying to steal a whale. Sulu had to steal a helicopter, and the only people who didn't have to really steal anything were McCoy and Scotty, where they had to convince a manufacturer to make transparent aluminum. So after Scotty gave the formula to make transparent aluminum, the company was able to, I guess, switch a portion of their manufacturing from plastic to aluminum and manufacture some panels so that they could bring the panels so that Sulu could fly the panels to the Klingon bird of prey so they could finish basically assembling a tank big enough for the whales. It's an empty tank because when they transport the whales, they transport the water with the whales, which leads to one of the greatest lines in Trek. After they get the whales on board, Scotty is like, "Admiral, there be whales here." So that's another thing that stuck with me through the years. So, they're able to get back to their own time in the 23rd century, relying on Spock to calculate the formula for the time jump. And he's concerned because of the extra weight from the whales and the water, and the doctor who basically found her way onto the ship before they could basically get her off the ship. Because Kirk was in a hurry, he was like, "Well, she's with us now. We're stuck with her now." And then she threw out the line where she's like, "Well, who in the 23rd century knows anything about whales?" And she's actually, that's her profession, is the study of whales. So, that it basically encourages him to keep her on the vessel. So Spock is, he has to calculate the time jump with the weights, but Scotty can't give him precise measurements. So to this, he has to guess. McCoy encourages him to guess what the weight would be what the calculation would be with uncertain variables. And Spock is uncomfortable with this, but he makes his best guess, and they're able to jump right before they actually left in the first place. And so when they get there, the ship immediately loses power and basically crash lands on Earth. But it crashes into the ocean, which is where they wanted to be anyway. It was somewhat of a soft crash, but it wasn't a graceful. It was a graceful crash, but it was a crash nonetheless. So they they're able to rescue the whales, rescue themselves. Everybody gets out. Everybody's happy. It's a happy ending, as usual. And the main reason why they brought the whales there was to communicate with the alien probe. So are they going to do it? Are they going to do the thing? Why aren't they singing? But then they start to sing, and the probe responds, and then it goes away. It closes up because it's this thing where it's kind of open. You feel like it's open, and then the alien vessel closes up and it goes away. It stops all the disruption that it was causing because it stopped transmitting the message. And basically, they're able to since they got power, they can basically affect repairs or whatever. And so everything happened exactly as I hoped that it would regarding the whales and the probe. So when I asked Zachary about it, so how'd you like it? He was like, so this is, basically he was like, this is a blatantly Save the Whales movie. It's like, yeah, it's a Save the Whales movie. So it's a Save the Whales movie because back in the 1980s, we were really concerned about the species that were in danger. I mean, we still are now, but it seemed much more potent back then. And so we still have a problem with whaling. We still have a issue with, huge conglomerates like hunting whales and possibly hunting them to extinction. And they are super intelligent because when the whales are being hunted, especially back in the 1800s, they just, if they were being hunted in a certain area, they just wouldn't go to that area anymore. They knew they were being hunted, so they stopped going to the area. And I'm sure you've read Moby Dick. You probably haven't, but I'm sure you have. And so in Moby Dick, it was about a whale that was attacking ships. And this is partly based on a true story. There really was a whale that the whalers had been trying to kill and had a hard time killing, and that is what partially what Moby Dick was based off of. So they're not dumb. Whales are not dumb. There have been instances where they've protected dolphins from killer whales, or sharks. No, not protected dolphins. I'm sorry. They protected sea lions and stuff like that. They would protect the prey of killer whales from the killer whales themselves, because killer whales love them some sea lions, and sometimes like a blue whale would come to the rescue to prevent a killer whale from killing the sea lion. So they're bright creatures. They're not dumb. And that's partially why there was a huge Save the Whale movement. And you probably haven't seen any commercials or public service announcements or anything like that regarding saving blue whales or the other types of whales in the ocean, but it was a really big deal back in the 1980s. So now that the Earth is saved, they still got to deal with Kirk stealing a starship and disobeying orders and stuff like that. And one neat thing is, when Kirk and his crew are brought to stand before the president of the council, Mr. Spock stands with him, even though he's not one of the accused. He has nothing to do with anything that happened affecting his resurrection. But Spock chooses to stand with his crewmates. And so the president decided that basically, since Kirk and his crew saved the Earth, because that was really the only thing that was really in danger, the Earth Starfleet headquarters that's on Earth, and then whatever ships that were in the path of the probe. So those were the things that were, and the probe wasn't intentionally damaging the ships or the starbase or Starfleet headquarters. It was just a consequence of looking for the whales and sending out these signals. But still, there were consequences for Kirk's action. So there were a bunch of charges that the entire crew faced. So the president of the council decided to drop all those charges and only charge Captain Kirk with disobeying orders. And his punishment, quote unquote, was to be reduced in rank from admiral to captain. Have I been saying captain all this time? Probably. He's been reduced in rank to admiral to captain and then assigned to a starship, since they feel that was the role for which he was best suited. Pretty much everybody leaves except for Kirk, Spock, and Sarek. And Sarek, Spock's father, is reflecting on their relationship. And in that reflection, he said, I remember that, I opposed your joining Starfleet, but I see that that's the best place for you. And, Spock was like, that's the best place. So when the conversation gets to an end, Sarek asks Spock, is there a message you want me to leave for your mother? And that's when Spock says, tell my mother I feel fine. And this is an important statement because as a Vulcan, he's half human, half Vulcan. His mother is human. His father, Sarek, is Vulcan. His father would rather him act like a Vulcan. And his mother wants him to explore his feeling. And he's always had trouble balancing the two. So, and there are times where he seems to, accept his human nature and, or he would embrace his emotions. And then there were times where he felt like he needed to act more Vulcan, or he couldn't fully embrace his emotions. So in the beginning of the film, he's taking this test to basically rehabilitate his cognitive abilities. And he's taking a test on like 3 computers simultaneously, answering questions and the computers are like shouting questions, all three of them like simultaneously, and he's answering these questions in turn, getting all the right answers. And then one computer asks him, "How do you feel?" And he pauses and he's not answering any more questions. So all the computers stop and they all ask him in unison, "How do you feel?" And he couldn't feel like he answered the question, or he didn't know how to answer the question. And that's when his mom had came into the room to talk to him about being able to feel his emotion or express his emotion or come to terms with him being half human. So at the end of the movie, he now knows how to answer the question. So I thought that was pretty sweet. So that was a movie. That was, I didn't mean to do a whole synopsis of the movie. It's just that most of the movie is my favorite parts. So I can basically go from scene to scene to express the parts that I loved about Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home. And I hope you got a chance to watch it. It's a great movie. It aged a little bit. There is some aging, and I'm not talking about aging in an offensive way. It's just aging in a sense that it just feels older and because it's 1980. In 1980 when we watched it, it was super modern, but now you can kind of see its age. But that's all right. It's still, for the most part, it still holds up. And this is one of Leonard Nimoy's one of the best movies he directed. It's interesting that he did not continue to direct, that he hadn't directed more films, because the following film was Three Men and a Baby, and that film was also well regarded. So you would think that, and so he has a pretty good track record. Star Trek 3 maybe not as much, but that was his directorial debut. And then Star Trek 4 was a huge hit, and then Three Men and a Baby, I remember liking it, and I think it was a well regarded film. So Three Men and a Baby. So I don't know why that he directed a couple other smaller projects, but his IMDb regarding direction is not, it's tiny. It's like 4 or 5 films. So it's surprising that he didn't do more. But yeah, so that was the movie. So now I believe it's time to go to the next part. So here we are at the next part where we talk about the trivia that we got from IMDb. So let's start off. Scotty helps Dr. Nichols invent, quote unquote, transparent aluminum, which in real life became possible 23 years later in 2009. In part, it was developed by Professor Justin Wark of Oxford University's Department of Physics. I actually remember seeing this on the internet when it happened. Now, I don't know if there's ever going to be practical application for this material or how hard it is, but they definitely made it. So hopefully we'll see it soon. The woman who answers Uhura and Chekhov when they're looking for the nuclear vessels was an extra who was not supposed to speak. Leila Sarakalu had never acted before and was told to act naturally. So, when she was asked, she improvised the answer. Much to Sarakalu's surprise, her unscripted line was kept in the film. Sarakalu happened upon the set when her car was towed away to make room for the film's production. Sarakalu offered to be an extra so that she could make money to get her car back. that is brilliant. I originally thought the scene was like a bunch of actual strangers, but I guess they were all extras. The idea of having Spock give the Vulcan nerve pinch to the punk rocker was inspired by Leonard Nimoy, who was walking down the street in New York City when a punk came out of the store with his boombox blaring, disturbing everyone around him. Annoyed, Nimoy thought, if I was really Spock, I would pinch his head off, according to Nimoy in Blu-ray audio commentary. James Doohan cited, "Admiral, there'll be whales here," as his favorite Scotty line. This film features the only instance in which Kirk says, "Scotty, beam me up." Because before there was no versions of Scotty, beam me up or beam me up, Scotty. As the alien probe approaches Earth at the film's beginning, it emits a sound wave that Spock first determines to be an attempt to communicate with humpback whales. After the first test screening and at a suggestion of Harve Burnett, Paramount Picture Studio heads sent Nimoy a memo asking him to create an on-screen subtitle to translate the sound and suggested "Where are you?" Nimoy and Nicholas Meyer insisted that any explanation what the probe and the whales were saying would ruin the sense of mystery. Eventually, Nimoy convinced Paramount Studios not to use subtitles. And that works. And that's pretty awesome, because a lot of times you ask the studio not to do something and they do something anyway. Lots of films have been ruined by studio interference. I'm looking at you, Blade Runner. William Shatner was originally reluctant to return to the Star Trek franchise. Leonard Nimoy and Harve Bennett considered making a prequel with the characters at Starfleet Academy. Eventually, Shatner was offered a pay raise in order to convince him to return. As a result of Shatner and Nimoy's raised salaries, Paramount Studios had to lower the budget for its new series, Star Trek: The Next Generation. And that's kind of messed up. That, to me, that seems like savvy contract negotiation. That's what that was. It's like, well, I don't know if I want to be in the next movie. You're the star. Yeah, I know I'm the star, but I don't know if I want to be in the next movie. That's just a savvy negotiation right there. Some shots of the whales were, in fact, 4-foot-long animatronic models. 4 models were created and were so realistic that after the release of the film, U.S. fishing authorities publicly criticized the filmmakers for getting too close to the whales in the wild. The scene involving these whales were shot in a pool underneath a parking lot at Paramount Studios. The shot of the whales swimming past the Golden Gate Bridge were filmed on location and nearly ended in disaster when a cable got snagged on a nuclear submarine and the whales were towed out to sea. That is so funny. And what's even funnier about it was that they found their nuclear vessel in real life. Leonard Nimoy said that after the dramatic nature of all previous Star Trek films and the events that occurred in them, he felt the need to lighten things up in the 4th film. A scene written for but deleted from this film explained why Saavik stays on Vulcan. She is pregnant with Spock's child, stemming from an event in Star Trek III, The Search for Spock. When she treated, quote-unquote, young Spock's Ponfar, this was the character's final appearance in the Star Trek film. So there are a couple of funny things about that. Explaining to non-Trek fans, Ponfar is something, a biological state that Vulcan males go through that makes them want to have sex really, really badly. And if they don't have sex, they will experience all this kind of pain and discomfort. It was first premiered in the original series, where Spock didn't experience pain at first, but what happened was that while they were aboard the Enterprise, he kept ordering the Enterprise to go to Vulcan, and he wouldn't remember doing it. And Captain Kirk would confront him about it. It's like, are you the one that's turning the ship towards Vulcan all the time? And he's like, I have no memory doing so. I might have. So apparently every 7 years, all Vulcan males start wigging out over sex. And when IMDb, when they said that Saavik tried to treat young Spock, basically the only way she could treat him was to have sex every time he went to Ponfar while he was on the Genesis planet. Now, all this story stuff was not acknowledged or written out of the script. They had considered it when they were filming Star Trek 3, and they had considered it when they were doing Star Trek 4, but they decided to abandon the plot line. But there is this thing that's going on in Star Trek where he has a bunch of secret relatives, and it started all the way back in the original series. He had a secret wife, and in later series he has, like in Star Trek 5, he has a secret brother. And then in Star Trek Discovery, he has a secret sister. At least with the brother, you kind of understand, because the brother, I guess, ran away or whatever. when they were both very young. And Spock's older brother, I think it's his older brother, and the older brother like runs away. He gets disillusioned with the Vulcans and Vulcan, and he runs away to start his own religion. But his sister was somebody he was raised with, and obviously he never talks about her because this was never actually planned when they created the Spock character in 1966. But they decided he needed to have a sister, so in the new series they gave him a sister, which I'm still, narratively, I'm still coming to grips with that. I'm still trying to make sense of it from a story point perspective, and it's bothersome. It looks good, but it's bothersome. I wish it could have been somebody else because he has already so many secret relatives. And the reason I'm going on this tirade is because the next secret relative is going to be Spock's secret son. I guarantee you that this plot point from Star Trek 3 and Star Trek 4 about Spock's love child, well, not even a love child, it's more like a Ponfar child. it's a Ponfar child with Savick. It's got to come up because Star Trek is so goofy in so many ways. So I can see this happening with somebody showing up. It's like, yes, I'm the son of Spock. It's like, when did this happen? And this is going to come up. But we'll see. We'll find out. The actor that's played Savick, she's still working. So we'll see what happens. Moving right along. Savick is only featured in the film a few minutes. The character was left behind on Vulcan by filmmakers as they did not really know what to do with her in the 20th century. San Francisco, in particular, Leonard Nimoy and Harve Bennett felt her to be too extraneous and saw the redundancy of having to hide a second Vulcan's identity while on Earth in the past. William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy improvised a continuing yes-no response to Gillian's question about liking Italian. So this is funny. I'd forgotten about this scene. So what had happened was that first of all, something weird happens. Going back to when Kirk and Spock were with the tourists on a guided tour by the doctor who was giving the tour, they were, watching the whales or whatnot. Then Spock dives into the pool and causes a stir. And then Dr. Gillian Taylor, she throws them out of the museum because, you're not supposed to swim with the whales. Totally understandable, right? So she sees them walking on the street, continuing their mission, trying to figure out, what the next step was. And she decides to give them a ride. These are the guys that you threw out of the museum. Why would you give them a ride? That's why I said that she was charmed by Admiral Kirk. He has that super charm. That's his superpower. Because the only reason why she would stop for people that she just threw out of her museum was that because Kirk was super charming. That's it. There's no other explanation. Because any other woman would have looked at them while she was driving her truck, gave them the stink eye, and continued right along. But she picks them up, and they get in her truck, and they're trying to discuss what they want to do. Kirk is being coy about his mission because he doesn't want to reveal that he's from the future, but at the same time, he's trying to get her to, help them get the whales. So she asked them, I think it was Kirk that made the suggestion that, they could talk about it over dinner. And then she says, you like Italian. And that's when Kirk and Spock go back and forth with, like, Kirk says yes, Spock says no. And they're going back and forth. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, right. So, and because Spock is basically newly formed, like he's still rehabilitating, he doesn't know how to lie, or exaggerate. So he's lied and exaggerated plenty of times in the TV show and in the movies. And as a matter of fact, in Star Trek 2, he exaggerated when they were I guess when they had that conflict with Khan. So they had to fool Khan into thinking that they were going to be ready later than they would to basically fight. Like they knew they was going to have to fight Khan, and Khan is waiting for them. So they had to create a deception. And so Spock was internet deception. He created this, exaggerated the information that they all knew that Khan was listening in on. But Spock in this movie doesn't know how to do that yet. He doesn't know how to lie. He doesn't know how to exaggerate. And so when he says that he doesn't like Italian food, he really doesn't like Italian food, and he wants it known. So that the whole back and forth thing, there was improvisation. And it was funny because it kind of harkens back to the Who's on First joke by Abbott and Costello. So moving right along, I think that was way too long an explanation. Catherine Hicks says she knew absolutely nothing about Star Trek before being cast in this film. She credits Leonard Nimoy with pausing in her auditions to explain things about the series, and says she opted against watching episodes of the television series or previous films after getting the role. Hicks credits her unfamiliarity with the Star Trek franchise as making Gillian's outsider encounter with the Star Trek universe more natural. And that makes sense. So it's like normally when you would kind of get into a franchise like Star Trek, you want to study, all the history of Star Trek and whatnot, because normally you're cast as one of the crew members or one of the enemy species or one of the aliens. You usually cast as something like that, and someone who would be up in on what Star Trek is about. But Hicks is a doctor she's playing a doctor from 1986. So obviously she wouldn't know anything about the Star Trek universe. So the actor opted to not watch anything, so she would still be an outsider. She felt that then it improved her performance, and I think that's totally genuine, and I like it. Next up, the white backlit table that is used at Starfleet headquarters becomes the center console in engineering of the U.S.S. Enterprise D on Star Trek The Next Generation. And Hollywood is magical because I did not recognize the lit table. It looked completely different from the way it appears in this movie. And there's a lot of that going on. There's a lot of movie sets that become television sets, and vice versa. There are a lot of uniforms that they wear on, like Star Trek, the movies, that are worn in the TV show because they didn't have enough in a budget, or the costume department didn't have enough time to replicate the uniforms, so actors are sharing uniforms or whatnot. It's all very fascinating. I'm sure they do it on other shows, but the fact that they do it on Star Trek and that you don't recognize the same sets, it just speaks to the craftsmanship that the people in studio work, the craftsmanships that the artisans have at redecorating an entire set. Catherine Hicks studied whales to help her prepare for her audition and subsequent role. As a result, Hicks became inspired to become actively involved in anti-whaling efforts. The computer that Scotty uses in Plexicore scenes appears to be a Macintosh Plus, but its internals were completely changed for filming. The screen was replaced with one from an IBM PC to make this easier to synchronize its video refresh rate with the film camera's frame rate, and the transparent aluminum animation was created on an IBM PC by computer graphics company Video Image. Which is interesting because, they also had ILM, but we'll let that slide. Gene Roddenberry was initially pleased to hear the film would be a time travel story, as he had been pushing for such a plot line in one of the films. Roddenberry had long wanted a story in which the crew traveled back in time in an attempt to stop the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, but Harve Bennett felt such a story would be anticlimactic, with the audience knowing such a history event could not be undone. And why would they want to do that? Why would they want to stop the assassination of John F. Kennedy? It already happened. I'm sure they can conceive of a story around it, but I don't know. To me, that feels kind of dumb. I think they did it best in Quantum Leap. Now, Quantum Leap was a story from the 1990s. I think it was the early 90s. It starred Scott Bakula, and it's about a time traveler. And in one episode, or a two-part episode, he thinks that he is supposed to stop the assassination. But the problem is that he's actually in the body of the killer, or one of the killers. And he's having a hard time preventing it from happening, because the villain's, the bad guy's consciousness is still in the body. Normally the consciousness, when Dr. Beckett, who Scott Bakula played, when he gets into a body, the other consciousness goes away, but this time it doesn't. So they're fighting for control of the body. So he's having a hard time stopping the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And after John F. Kennedy is actually killed, he feels like he failed in his mission. But then his hologram mentor or partner, or in this Quantum Leap project, he reminds him, what's his name? I think his name is Sam. He reminds Beckett, was his name Beckett? I can't remember. He reminds Beckett that both the president and his wife was killed. And so he was successful in saving Jackie Kennedy, but he was unable to save the president. So he was partially successful in his mission. But I think that would be the best way to do a story like that. But, doing a story where they try to stop the assassination of John F. Kennedy, that seems kind of bonkers. I don't really see Gene Roddenberry as a great writer, but he knows how to hire great writers, so that at least he can do that. Moving right along, on to the next one. Catherine Hicks improvised the hard slap that Dr. Gillian Taylor gave to Bob Briggs for releasing the whales earlier. Scott Devaney's reaction is real. So Scott Devaney played Bob Briggs, and they're in a scene where Dr. Gillian Taylor is upset because the whales were released early. She knew that they were going to be released, but there was a timetable. She knew about that timetable, and Scott Devaney, the character he created, Bob Briggs, had broke it to her that they released the whales early because they wanted to avoid a public spectacle, and I guess they didn't want to have her be all upset and hysterical or whatever with the whales being released. And she said, "You let them go without letting me say goodbye," and then she slaps him. The slap actually looked fake, so I didn't know that she slapped him for real. So that's funny. When they sing, humpback whales move into an upside down vertical position as correctly depicted in this film. After hearing the humpback whale's response, the alien probe also moves into the same position and replies. I was like, oh, okay. That's why I did that. That's pretty cool. Leonard Nimoy provided the low wub, 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 wub sound that the cigar-shaped alien probe makes while flying through space. Sound effects editor Mark A. McGeaney had came up with several possible sound effects for the probe, none of which Nimoy liked. Finally, McGeaney asked, "Well, what do you think the alien probe should sound like?" Nimoy thought for a moment, then did a vocal impression of the sound he thought the alien probe should make. McGeaney said, "Okay, let's use that." Nimoy stepped into the recording booth and did a 2-minute voice recording of the wub, 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 wub sound. McGeaney took this recording of Nimoy's voice and mixed it with electronic feedback and whale songs to make the alien probe sound. The restaurant scene was filmed in an actual restaurant. This did not have a pizza oven, but the characters ordered pizza. Paramount bought and installed a pizza oven to make the kitchen more believable. The oven was given to the restaurant after filming was complete. But after all that effort, the oven is only visible for 5 seconds in this film. And in watching the film, I never noticed. I know the ordered pizza, I wasn't expecting to see a pizza oven because I'm never looking for a pizza oven, especially in a place that's not just a pizza restaurant. So I expect, and it could have been in the back. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the front where the guests can see or where the diners can see. It could be in the back behind a partition or whatever. But I guess the producers decided it needed to be in the front, or maybe Nimoy decided it needed to be in the front. The studio needed to buy him a piece of oven, which probably cost a couple of $1,000s. And to start in a restaurant, I was like, okay, you can have it. Yeah, so that's pretty neat. The film's success led to William Shatner guest hosting Saturday Night Live in 1986. It was during that appearance that Shatner performed the infamous Star Trek convention / Get a Life sketch. And if you hadn't seen it, it's pretty awesome. I was looking for it on YouTube. I had a really hard time finding it. I don't think I really found that sketch, but that was basically he was doing a Star Trek convention where he basically made fun of the Trekkies that were, dressed as him, dressed as Mr. Spock, dressed as aliens. He's making fun of the Trekkies there at the convention. Well, not really, not at first. So at first he's answering questions dutifully. They ask him all these questions, these personal questions. They ask questions about his horses. They know more about his horses than he does. And then he kind of breaks out and kind of loses it. And he was like, let me put it this way. Get a life, people. It's like, and then he pointed at one dude. He's like, you ever kissed a girl? Like, you need to get a life. It's just a TV show. Why are you here at this convention? It's just a TV show. And then, like, his manager came on stage and had words with him, and they had a kind of like a quiet fight. And then it got William Shatner back on track, and he's like, okay, live long and prosper or whatever. And basically kind of apologized to the fans for, getting out of turns, getting out of sorts with the Star Trek community who admires Star Trek. So that was well, I'm doing a bad explanation of it. You really got to go and find the sketches. It's pretty awesome. The film was originally supposed to have Eddie Murphy instead of Catherine Hicks. Murphy was supposed to have played a professor concerned with UFOs who spots the decloaking Klingon warship at the Super Bowl. Apparently, all others are convinced the ship is a halftime special effect, while Murphy believes it is real. Paramount declined this script for 2 reasons. They did not want to combine their 2 most profitable franchises, Star Trek and Beverly Hills Cop. And Murphy had signed on to do The Golden Child, which also came out in 1986 instead. While it's widely thought that Admiral Kirk was the biggest offender in breaking Starfleet's temporal laws, quote unquote, that honor should go to Chekhov. Before escaping the naval officers, he threw his phaser at them and left his communicator and Starfleet ID badge. None of these items were ever retrieved and would have caused a major temporal paradox. Now, theoretically, they may have been able to trace the tricorder signal and maybe some residual radiation from the phaser, and it could have beamed them back aboard the Klingon vessel. They probably wouldn't have been able to find his Starfleet ID, but that could be seen as faked. But yeah, but it didn't show that in the movie. So as far as everybody's concerned, he left a bunch of future tech on a U.S. aircraft carrier, which is not where you want to leave your high security stuff. But I guess the people at that time was never able to figure it out. And by the time they did figure it out, they were already developing that tech anyway. Theoretically, I don't know. The captain of the U.S.S. Saratoga seen in the film's beginning was the first female captain ever seen in a Star Trek story, and she was African American to boot. The success of this film led to offers by several U.S. television networks to produce a new Star Trek series with the original cast. Instead, Paramount gave the green light to produce the syndicated Star Trek The Next Generation that came out in 1987, starring an all-new cast. A woman, that being Kate Mulgrew, was cast as the ship's captain in a spin-off series, Star Trek Voyager, and that came out in 1995. And you've probably seen Kate Mulgrew in The Scarecrow and Mrs. King, or more recently, Orange is the New Black. Major Barrett appears as Christine Chapel for the final time. A year later, she would begin her reoccurring role as Lwaxana Troi on Star Trek The Next Generation, which she also played on Star Trek Deep Space Nine. She also provided the computer voice on The Cage, Roddenberry's original pilot, for all of the original series and the Next Generation episodes and films, Voyager, Deep Space Nine, Enterprise, and the animated series episode. But it's kind of strange seeing her as the on Star Trek 4, the movie that we're talking about now, only because like she's started off as a nurse and now she's like a commander and she's not doing any nurse duties. So I guess she switched careers. I guess we're going to go with that. Nurse Chapel switched careers and decided to become, I don't know, ops specialist. Yeah, that's it. That's the ticket. And so that's it for all the groovy trivia that we've had. I hope you've enjoyed that. And now we're going to transition to see what the critics thought. All right, thank you for sticking with us. We're here to see the critics' thoughts, see what they thought about Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home. The critics on Rotten Tomatoes gave it an 82%. The audience gave it an 81% score. And on IMDb reviews, it has a 7.3 out of 10. So let's see what the first critic thought. David Stratton from the Sydney Morning Herald, he wrote, much of the fun to be found in the quite witty screenplay involves the bemused citizens of the future trying to cope with 20th century life. Yes, I mentioned it earlier. Yes, it was fun watching them roam around 1980s landscape, confused and bemused. Mike Massey from Gone with the Twins wrote, time travel is a new concept for this series, and having a crew visit a familiar version of Earth is certainly an amusing idea, but why did it have to involve whales? This is quite possibly one of the dumbest and uninformed reviews I have ever read. For one reason, it's dumb because Star Trek has been messing with time travel, I think I mentioned earlier, since the original series, since the TV show back in 1966. They went back in time at least twice, possibly 3 times. And there were other concepts they did in the movie that they've done in the TV series, and the TV series that didn't actually translate to the movie series so far, but it was they did all kinds of stories in the original series. And time travel was one of those stories. So to say that this is a new concept, it's dumb. Especially if you look at the movie, the blasé way that they go back in time, it's almost routine. So it's weird that he would have this take on it. The other thing that he said that doesn't make any sense is that he said, why did it have to be whales? Why not? Why not whales? What did you want it to involve, right? Do you hate whales? Whales can't be a legitimate story plot point? What? Why are you mad at whales? What's wrong, Mike? Are you well? Moving right along. Matt Brunson from Film Frenzy wrote, the comedy in this entry is so broad that the movie doesn't often even feel like a Star Trek project, which of course explains its wild popularity. Now, yeah, that's generally correct. It was a very broad film. It was a film. One of the reasons that it grows so much that it was, I want to say that it was very relatable to the audience. So I think that was one of the appeals. I mean, it happens in modern times. The film came out at around 1986. The story took place in 1986. It was very accessible. So yeah, that's very correct. Sean Monroe wrote, well, he's from Flickering Myth, and he wrote, as much a passionate, heavy-handed environmental screed as it is a flighty space opera, The Voyage Home can't ever quite reconcile its desperate moods and ideas into a holistic experience. I probably read that wrong. I didn't put the right emphasis on the right words. I guess I'm not going to read it again. At this point, I'm super tired, but it's kind of hard to figure out what he's trying to say. Is it a heavy-handed environmental screed? Yeah. There a lot of movies were like that back in the 1980s and 90s. There were a lot of there was a lot of Activision going on screen. It's not really a flighty space opera. They don't really do much in space. Most of the action takes place on Earth. It said it can't reconcile its desperate moods and ideas into a holistic. Yeah, I meant to look up the word holistic to get a better meaning of what this quote is, and I hadn't. I don't think it would make the last part of the quote. I don't think it would make any better sense. It was a fun movie. I don't know what he's talking about. I'm sorry. Let's move right along. Rita Kempley from the Washington Post wrote, a happy, heartfelt chapter that reunites the original cast with the original TV format, shying away from the code and epic scale of the preceding movie adventures. I mean, yeah, I feel that's partially correct. I don't see how it's like it's the same as the original TV format. I don't understand what she's saying there, but I don't know. I don't know what she means by that, because I guess maybe she's referring to it a somewhat lighter tone. But they had some episodes that were super serious and some episodes that were somewhat light. But it was I think an hour and a half movies. I don't know what she means by it. It reunites the cast with the original TV format. That's a little bit confusing to me because it didn't really feel like a television episode. For example, a lot of the Next Generation films, Star Trek The Next Generation, a lot of those films actually felt like movie versions of a TV episode. And I did not like those all that much. So, such as Star Trek Generations felt like a 2-part TV episode. Star Trek, what was the next one? I can't even remember. I think there's one called Insurrection. That felt like a 2-hour television episode. Like a lot of the movies in the Star Trek Generation franchise felt like they could have been episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation. And I don't think that this movie, Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home, fits that description, because it didn't feel like a regular TV episode. It was too much in it. That the acting was too authentic. I guess there were too many extras for it to feel that way. They were filming outside. Like on the TV show, they always filmed on set. They rarely filmed outside. I don't think they ever filmed like outside on location. They always felt like they were on a set. Even in certain episodes, like there was one particular episode when they went back in time, they're on a city street, but even that felt like it was on a set. So no, I don't know what she's talking about in that, but she has a generally positive attitude toward the film. Finally, we have Mark Bourne from DVDjournal.com. He wrote, it's a lightweight, entertaining, relentlessly mainstream action farce. A high old time, no question. Too bad it's such lousy Star Trek. Here's where the series jumped the shark, quote, and found that it was a whale. I don't. He just didn't like the movie, so he had to write something clever to explain why he didn't like it. It's not lousy at all by any stretch of their imagination, and the box office backs me up. But no, I don't. I can't explain why somebody likes or doesn't like something, and you can't expect to please everybody with your product. Obviously, he didn't like it, and he tried to explain it in words, and his words makes no sense. And I think I'll just leave it at that. And at that, we've reached the end of this episode. So finally, final announcements. Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home is, as of this recording, available on Paramount+. That's the conclusion of our look at the Genesis trilogy, as some people call it. It is the trilogy within the hexalogy of the original Star Trek movie franchise. Next, we go in a totally new direction with True Lies, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jamie Lee Curtis, and Tom Arnold. Follow us on Twitter at Backlit Cinema or on Facebook or Instagram at Backlit Cinema Podcast for updates. And now we're posting videos on TikTok, and you can check that out at Backlit Cinema. Don't forget that you can contact us with any questions, comments, or suggestions at fanmail@backlitcinema.com. One last time, if you like this show, then please help us grow. To do that, you can subscribe to this show, rate us, or write a review on Spotify, podchaser.com, Apple Podcast, or your favorite podcast app. Believe me, it matters. Be safe. Share a movie from yesteryear with your family. Hug your loved ones. And if you're going to be anything, be outstanding.